Hi everybody. We are going to go ahead and get started on this webinar today. We've got Nick Redden and Satya KG here with us today. Satya is our cloud wizard here at ATC, and he attended the AWS reInvent, and he's going to tell us all of the best parts about it. So we're really looking forward to that. Before we get started, I'm going to give you guys a short introduction of each of our folks here. Nick Redden is our vice president here at ATC. With 25 years of experience in technology working with Fortune 500 companies, he specializes in innovations, sales, and change management. There he is right there. All right, and Satya, who is here with us, he's our solution lead for cloud here at ATC, which most of you already know is one of our many services that we offer. Satya has 15 years consulting startups and mid to large enterprise in software engineering and specifically cloud infrastructure. He specializes in AWS, which is Amazon Web Services, I'm sure all of you know that, and Google Cloud, and he's attended this conference 3 times. So this year he really knew what to expect, and he was able to mark down the key takeaways that we'll discuss today. Okay guys, a little bit about ATC for those of you who don't know us. We are a business solutions company helping clients bridge the technology and process gap in order to accelerate their growth. Now that can mean a million different things in a million different ways. So we're a business solutions company and we help people with their technology and let them scale. That's everything that we do, whether it's from cloud, RPA, staffing, all kinds of stuff. So today we're going to focus specifically on cloud. And on that note, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Nick.
Great, thank you, Kelsey. I appreciate it, and thank you for the introduction as well. So today what we're going to talk about is the AWS reInvent conference. So this conference is a massive conference. It's easily one of the biggest conferences in the world. And we had Satya attend that conference, and we're able to pull back what I think are some really good nuggets and very interesting about the changes that are coming in the next year. So it's really impossible to kind of get a grip and a grasp on everything that takes place there. They have over 2,500 sessions during the conference, which is just a mammoth of content and opportunity to learn. So if you've never gone, we would of course encourage you to go. But what we tried to do was summarize and kind of bring back what we thought were some of the more interesting pieces of it that will help you in if you did go, in learning some of the things you may not have been able to attend. So one of the things we also want to ask is that you submit questions, and you can submit those as we go. And we will either try to answer them as we go, depending on where we're at in the presentation, or we'll definitely answer them at the end, where you can also submit questions. So we do appreciate that. So we've got quite a bit of content here that we're going to talk about and subjects that we're going to cover. So our overall agenda for the presentation is we're going to talk about containers and Kubernetes, data analytics, machine learning and AI, security, and then of course edge computing. And Satya is going to kind of take over from here, and then we'll start to address this as we go. So Satya, take it away.
Thanks, Nick. I appreciate it. So thanks everyone for joining today's webinar, and we are going to cover a bunch of these areas. Most likely, one of the hot areas today is containers and Kubernetes. I think over the last few years, we have seen the kind of the developer shift in terms of deploying applications on bare metal to become virtualizing their applications, and now containers have kind of swept it. So AWS has been placing a lot of focus on containers and Kubernetes. In the past, they had services like Elastic Container Service, they had Elastic Kubernetes Service, and this year they decided to add a couple of more features on top of that. One of the new features is the Amazon Elastic Kubernetes Service with support for Fargate, right? And basically, Elastic Kubernetes Service to run, Kubernetes pods on AWS Fargate, right? So the Fargate makes itself is a very straightforward to run Kubernetes-based applications, so that it eliminates the need to provision and manage these applications. So Fargate is like a serverless compute environment that allows developers to scale their Kubernetes applications. So with the beauty about Fargate is customers do not need to be experts in Kubernetes operations to run a cost optimized and a highly available cluster. Fargates also eliminates the need for customers to create and manage EC2 instances for their EKS cluster, right? So customers no longer have to worry about patching, scaling, or securing a cluster of large amount of EC2 instances which have Kubernetes applications running on the cloud, right? So this makes it very easy for developers to right size resource utilization for each applications and allow customers to see the cost of each pod that's running within the Kubernetes cluster. And the next service that we are going to talk about is the ECS cluster auto scaling, right? ECS as a service has existed for over 3 years now. ECS clusters have come into existence since then, but the auto scaling piece of it is kind of completely a new feature. What this enables you to do is to have more control over how you scale tasks within a very specific cluster. For example, each cluster would have its own capacity providers, and the default optional capacity provider is set as a manual configuration by the system administrator or the developer. And today developers have to go back and allow provisions of configuration to auto scale the cluster. By enabling ECS cluster auto scaling as a feature, you can default the cluster's capacity capacity so that it supports the tasks or services that you run, right? The third interesting feature in the containers and the Kubernetes ecosystem is something called as a capacity provider. Capacity providers are a new way to manage compute capacity for containers, right? Basically, it allows application to define the requirements about how to use the capacity. So think of it like a set of flexible rules of how these containerized workloads run on different types of compute capacity and how you manage the scale of this capacity. Capacity providers allow developers to improve the availability, scalability, and the cost of running tasks within the ECS environment itself, right? And what I have broadly seen is there were also statements that close to 70% of the production Kubernetes workloads that is running today runs on Amazon ECS, and the number of containerized workloads that are kind of going through the migration has been growing at a rate of 200% year on year. So there's a lot of room for containers and Kubernetes here.
So Satya, we know Kubernetes is growing like crazy. There's a lot of demand. We see it ourselves in companies wanting to deploy more in the cloud with Kubernetes. How much of that do you think is going to continue to grow this next 2 years?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Nick. I think if you look at the past 10-15 years, virtualization took almost 10-15 years to emerge, and having customers run virtualized workloads in their data centers took almost like a 10-15 year run. But what we are seeing with the container adoption, especially with the web scale companies and some of the fast growing companies, I think the run is going to be much shorter. So it's very fair to say that we don't have to wait a 10-15 year window like a virtualized environment. I think the containerization and the entire cube is going to see a very rapid adoption in the next 2-3 years, and we have also seen a lot of traditional companies and environments, like for example banking, healthcare, adopt containers environment purely for 2 reasons. One is the overall cost of operations, and second thing is improve their customer experience because their infrastructure costs become lower and it gives them a better option to run workloads at scale.
Sure. So we've got the big 3 providers out there. Obviously, Amazon has definitely had the lion's share of the market, not just with Kubernetes, but cloud in particular. Do you think any of that's going to change? There's a lot of speculation as it relates to Kubernetes and if it's going to give, Google a leg up on Amazon, or if it's going to give Microsoft a leg up on Amazon. Do you think there'll be any changes, or do you think Amazon will continue to own the space?
Yeah, so what we have really seen is while Kubernetes itself originated from Google as a native project, we have seen kind of more pick up and run from AWS and Azure. In fact, I have seen that Azure and AWS being more aggressive in the overall Kubernetes execution space by adding their own value-added offerings on top of the Kube project. Unfortunately, Google wasn't able to capitalize much on their Kubernetes offering, but looks like the AWS and Azure are really aggressive in terms of launching their own offerings. Surprisingly, we have also seen players like VMware, which recently bought Pivotal about 2 days ago, kind of double down with their Pivotal Kubernetes service, Pivotal container service. So looks like there's going to be a lot of momentum, and it's not just the cloud guys, but also the traditional virtualization providers, infrastructure providers become more aggressive in the container and the Kube space.
Yeah, do you think with VMware in particular, they've done a lot in the last probably 6 months, really reshaping and reimagining, if you will, their business and pivoting to Kube? Do you think that was really just to save their name and to stay in business?
Not necessarily. It's a fundamental shift that's happening in the technology world, because people are now realizing, for example, Google is a company that have seen web scale, right? And they were the company that were running millions and millions of requests per second with very less infrastructure, and it was only possible because of containerization and Kubernetes, right? So it's a big technological shift that's happening, where there was bare metal, there was virtualization, and now there is containers and Kubernetes. So what we are seeing is players across the spectrum, whether they are infrastructure providers, whether they are virtualization providers, or other independent software vendors, everyone is trying to catch this wave of containerization. So it's a big fundamental shift in terms of how applications are developed and deployed, and looks like they definitely do not want to miss out on this wave as well. But it's a big pivot that they have been undergoing as well. Yep.
Yeah, it seems like it's going to be an exciting year for all of this.
Yep. Sounds good. One of the hot areas that a lot of customers speak about is the overall data and analytics. So today, while data itself isn't really new, but how data is kind of captured, the velocity of the data today that some of these companies are seeing, and how to persist, not just persist the data, but also see how to make sense out of it, right? So data and analytics play a very crucial role for very companies, and surprisingly, one of the fastest growing products within AWS is this product called Redshift. Redshift is like a data warehouse that supports multiple workloads, and Redshift had launched a lot of features over the years. One of the very interesting features that came back from a lot of customer feedback and loops is this ability to do federated query. So a federated query is a very interesting feature that allows the user to query and analyze data across operational databases, data warehouse, and data lakes. Although Redshift is always originated as a data warehouse in itself, now developers and admins have the ability to integrate queries on live data that's going on in Amazon RDS for Postgres or Amazon Aurora, so that you can run your queries both on Redshift and in parallel any of the other relational databases that you have hosted there. The beauty about is as part of the BI and reporting, today customers are seeing, hey, great, I earlier want to put all my data in a warehouse and then report on top of it. But what they are also realizing is that the level of time it takes for data to come to a warehouse and analyze on top of it, that's mostly like a batch based environment. So it's not near real time. Customers want to see insights in real time. When they want to see insights in real time, they need to have the ability to query the data across multiple data stores or anything. That is why this feature of federated query is very powerful, right? And we all know that Redshift has its own massively parallel processing capabilities, but what federated query allows you to do is ingest data into Redshift and query operational databases, and you can apply transformations on the file and do complex and build and deploy data without having complex ETL pipelines.
So is Redshift, I know there's a lot, I've been seeing a lot of talk about this as well. So this is similar to what Splunk was kind of doing, right? Or
Yes.
right in that kind of thread, if you will.
Exactly. So what happens is you brought a very interesting point, Nick, because if you look at in the past, like there were data warehouses like Teradata, or HP Vertica, etc. Right? Unfortunately, these data warehouses has very strong storage and compute bound to them. So if you want to run more queries or something, you have to add more nodes, and it was not scalable. So with tools like Redshift, which is where you can both the compute and the storage layer are completely elastic. So you can run millions and millions of queries at any point, and then you can also persist any kinds of data, whether it is relational data, whether it is columnar data, whether it is time series data. You can persist all of them into Redshift and query them. But what we have also seen is not just Redshift from AWS, but other products like BigQuery from Google or Azure Data Warehouse. All of them have been growing phenomenally because customers realize that, hey, I need a way to persist all the data and quickly derive insights from it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Redshift's really going to be a good boon for them as far as their offerings overall.
Exactly. Yep. So one of the other interesting services, of course, Amazon for the last couple of years has Elasticsearch service, right? Which is a managed Elastic. They have announced something called Ultra Warm. So Ultra Warm is a performance optimized storage tier. What it allows you to do is it allows you to store and interactively analyze your data using Elasticsearch and Kibana, so that it reduces your cost per gigabyte up to 90% over existing Amazon Elasticsearch hot storage options. Because today when you use the Amazon Elasticsearch service, of course you still, when you run any kind of queries, you still have to pay on a cost per GB. But with Ultra Warm, this is more like a performance optimized warm storage tier, so it will reduce your overall query and analysis cost. Cool. Last but not the least, EMR as a service has been very, very popular, and a lot of customers of Amazon has been saying, hey, EMR is really great, but can we replicate EMR in our own data center? Which is a very, very interesting proposition, because of course there are a lot of solutions like Kafka, PubSub, and couple of other PubSub mechanisms that customers have been using within their own data center environments, but EMR has been a very, very successful service. So customers has been saying, hey, how do we make it run within our own data centers? So that's when Amazon launched this service called EMR is now available in data center using Outpost service, which we are going to slightly talk later. So basically, the beauty about is you can create the EMR cluster on premises using your AWS console or command line, and the clusters will appear within your Outpost, and you can you can start running the cluster similarly how you would run cluster on an AWS. The biggest advantages that it gives is it allows you to augment on-premise processing capacity. It allows you to process data that needs to remain on-prem. So for example, if you have data sets that you always want to process and persist on-prem, you can continue doing that by using EMR. And most importantly, it will also accelerate data and workload migrations should the customer choose at a later point of time.
So machine learning and AI obviously is huge, and I know these are going to be some really good topics. But just as a reminder to our audience as well, if you have any questions about any of the things that we've talked about so far, please feel free to submit those at any time, and we'll either try to answer them as we go, or we'll definitely catch them at the end.
Sure. Thanks. I'm sure the machine learning and AI is a very, very hot topic. In fact, most of the AWS services that were announced, a significant portion of them featured machine learning and AI. It's no surprise it continues to attract the attention of the entire AWS reInvent audience, right? So, for a long time, while the spectrum of tooling around machine learning and AI has been relatively new, what AWS has been trying to do is it's trying to double down on some of the key tooling that will improve the experience for machine learning engineers and other audience that has to play around with machine learning models. So, in fact, the entire whole school of thought is earlier machine learning used to be the confines of machine learning engineers, and the tooling used to be slightly complex. So they are coming out with lot of tooling and knowledge to bring that level of expertise to ordinary audience as well, so that there can be non-developer audience like business folks or admins or product managers that should be able to use SageMaker to deploy machine learning models. So SageMaker is kind of their integrated studio where they launched a lot of new features. So for example, they have launched experiments, debuggers, model monitor, autopilot. Let's look at what each of them really mean. So SageMaker Experiments is a new capability that lets you organize, track and compare and evaluate your machine learning experiments and model versions, right? And Debugger allows you to automatically identify complex issues developing in your ML training jobs. Model Monitor is more like an application performance monitoring tool that automatically monitors your machine learning models in production. So think of it like a runtime monitoring of your machine learning model, and alerts you whenever there are issues in the data quality, data pipeline, or in terms of feature engineering. So think of it like a performance management tool. And autopilot is an interesting feature. It's almost like SageMaker, SageMaker is using its own AI capabilities to automatically create and pick the best classification and regression machine learning models while allowing the user to have control and visibility. So what SageMaker is really evolving into is an end-to-end workbench or a platform that allow people to create these models, run experiments, debug the models, monitor these models in production at runtime to see if there are any data issues or feature engineering issues, and you can also autopilot SageMaker should you wish to, right? The other interesting service that came out is AWS Code Guru. So Code Guru is like a managed services. So for a long time, developers had to rely on writing their own code and getting their code reviewed by their peers, right? And peers would make comments with the developer. It's an iterative process. So imagine a service that that syntactically tell you every line of code that you write and keeps giving you on best practice recommendations. So Code Guru is that service that helps developers proactively improve code quality through an AI-driven recommendations. So basically, the whole service it comes with a reviewer and a profiler that can detect and identify issues in code. An example would be Amazon Code Guru can review and profile Java code targeting the JVM. So developers can continuously use it to improve their application performance. So you no longer require the peer reviews or manager reviews. Cool. The other interesting service is actually Kandra. So Amazon has launched Kandra, which is a managed service that brings contextual search to applications. The contextual search is very, very relevant. For a long time, we have seen the various solutions for enterprise search. But with contextual search, what it allows you to do is it can parse documents stored in a variety of mediums. So for example, a lot of organizations have files stored in Box, Dropbox, Salesforce, SharePoint, etc. But if you would want to contextually search within those specific files or specific data from a third-party service, Kandra allows you to do it. So for example, I might be operating in a customer support ticket system, but I do want to search for data that's in Salesforce, or I do want to search for data or some onboarding documents that's available on SharePoint, etc. I can search directly from that customer support system without having to leave and then go to a third-party application and then do it. So it's kind of provides contextual search for various data sources used by the enterprise from anywhere.
So it sounds like, and what it seems to be happening is, Amazon, of course, or AWS, Amazon has a huge ecosystem of partners out there that seem to have been doing, as a third-party application, like you had just said, some of these features. So it seems like they're kind of, for lack of a better term, replacing some of their ecosystem with their own platforms and their own tools. Does that seem to be what's taken place?
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement, but ultimately it's up to the customer, right, to opt for what is the right choice. The customer has to decide what fits their needs best. Obviously, if you look at the file sharing system, there is Box and Dropbox, right? The customer can, or SharePoint, right? Customer can choose to pick any of these solutions. So I think it's always going to be a competing market, I would say. Amazon is going to compete with other independent service providers. So for example, a very simple example is application performance monitoring. You can use App Dynamics or New Relic, or you can use AWS CloudWatch. But a lot of customers pick App Dynamics or New Relic because they know a very focused application in that with a very, very deep capability might serve their needs better, whereas probably for an entry point solution I can use AWS CloudWatch. So it's really up to the customer. Of course, the market is becoming more competitive. Amazon is going after many of the ISVs as well, but I think customer will always have their say in terms of what to pick for them. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. Competition makes everybody better typically.
Yep. Sounds good. I think one of the hot areas that's coming out from the heels of machine learning and AI is security. That's kind of on top of everyone's mind, and there are a lot of services that were announced at reInvent around cloud security, and a lot of partner offerings also on how to monitor your instances, how to collect data from your instances, how to ensure your customer data or personable identifiable information is not stored on any of the data stores or instances or etc. But some of the things that really stood out are Amazon Detective, Nitro Enclaves, and Access Analyzer for the S3 access points. So Detective is an interesting service because it allows you to investigate and identify potential security issues faster. In a way, what it essentially does is it collects all the log data from all the AWS services and resources you have been using, and it uses machine learning to identify the issues and probably also alert. In fact, there is also a self remediation capability within Detective itself that allows you to identify those security issues and auto remediates itself without a human intervention. It's really up to the configuration of the administrator to decide would I let Detective run on autopilot, or would I want to intervene for each of the security issue that's kind of brought up front. Nitro Enclaves is an interesting proposition. So basically, it processes highly sensitive data by partitioning the compute and memory resources allocation within a particular instance to create an isolated compute environment. So this is very, very useful because a lot of we have seen with the recent California Consumer Protection Act and earlier with the GDPR, etc. There are some environments where personally identifiable information and it needs to be treated very carefully in healthcare, financial, or other verticals, right? So what Nitro Enclaves allows you to do is it uses the same hypervisor technology that allows you to isolate both the compute and memory resources within a particular instance and allows you to process data very carefully.
So this is a really good one. We know this is something customers have been asking for, that we've heard just internally as well with our own clients. But what industries in particular do you think are really going to benefit from this?
Yeah, I think what we are essentially seeing is regulated industries like financial services, healthcare, and wherever there is a lot of consumer data that needs to be persisted, consumer data that needs to be more secure enough. So for example, you can have all the e-commerce data about a customer, which is still important, but it's not as important as a social security or some other information. So wherever there is lot more sensitive information about, let's say, credit history or some etc., and where it needs to be more regulated, I think this has a better use case. But in general, what we are also seeing is every customer has been looking for options to have a control on the customer data wherever it resides, and most importantly during the transmission and at rest, the data that they would want to have a thorough amount of security or encryption for that matter. Yeah.
Sure, no, that makes sense.
Cool. Last but not least, there's also an IAM Access Analyzer. IAM within AWS has existed for a very long time, but what happens is, you can give within the IAM Access, you can create roles and you can assign individuals within the organization. But unfortunately, granting access to an external principal that is not within the zone of trust has always been a big challenge, and that's where S3 access points really came through. So basically what happens is Access Analyzer for S3 alerts the admins so that the S3 buckets are properly configured to allow access to anyone on the internet and other AWS accounts that they handle, right? So sometimes because S3 is kind of a distributed file store or an object store, sometimes you would want to give permissions. A very simple example is a company like Ford might want to share files with their suppliers or want to collaborate with some other suppliers downstream the lane. So basically, you can create a bucket, you can set access permissions on those bucket, and you can define who would have read-write access through access control list.
So it seems like we know from just our own customers and companies that we've been working with that governance is a really big issue for companies around their cloud instances, and a lot of them have either no governance or very light governance at best. So it sounds like, if I'm not wrong, AWS is really stepping up to help companies have better governance over their access points.
Yes. That's a very, very apt statement, because companies have kind of matured enough on how to do access governance for their physical infrastructure and how to do it for their applications. But most of it was the applications and the infrastructure within their control, right? Because they were running in their the applications or infra in their own data center, so they had more control over. Unfortunately, with the cloud, now it's kind of spread across regions. You might have infrastructure or applications in East Coast, West Coast, etc., and you might have applications running anywhere around the world. Somehow that loss of control is something that needs to be compensated with a better governance model, which is what everyone is trying to improve, right? The cloud governance model is something that both organizations and even the cloud vendors themselves are going through a maturity curve. But it's very fair to say that in couple of years, the cloud governance model would kind of more standardize, like your ISO 27001, and then it would be uniform across. But right now, I would say everyone is going through that maturity curve. Yeah.
That's good. That'll make our jobs a lot easier, because I know that's always one of the first things we have to do with a lot of the companies is help them with their governance.
Yes. I think the other interesting things which probably is a spike that's coming out is the edge computing. So a lot of audience were very familiar with the cloud computing model. In fact, there was also a lot of audience says, hey, what is this really edge computing about, and what is it going to do for me, right? Three things that stood out from the edge computing announcements are Outposts, local zones, and Wavelength.
So for our audience that may not know what edge computing is, because this is the cutting edge of things that are taking place. With edge computing is new. Even people in the business don't really seem to be able to understand it very well. So for those listening, what is edge computing?
Sure. So what essentially happened is the cloud computing model evolved in a two-phase model, right? So earlier people used to have data centers. Now they have these public cloud providers. These public cloud providers have regional centers. These regional centers are spread across the US and other parts of the globe. Unfortunately, because let's say if you're an online service, your customers can be any part of the US. That doesn't necessarily mean they are very closely located to that regional center where this public cloud provider has an office, right? So the user can experience some latencies, some other application challenges. So what really happening is what these cloud guys are thinking, hey, now we have taken the cloud to the real cloud in the cloud, but now we need to bring the cloud closer to the user. So bringing the cloud closer to the user means you need to shrunk the data center within the public cloud to bring it much more closer to the user to give him a better experience. So that's all edge computing is about. Edge computing is about eventually providing a better access mechanism for the user in whichever location he is, so that he can have a better experience. So how do we make it happen? Basically, we need to bring both the compute network and the storage much more closer to where the user is, so that the application which runs on this environment can give a better experience to the user. So that's at a high level what edge computing is. But at a different note, what edge computing is also is customers who move to the cloud, but they would still have some workload that they can never move to the workload, but they want to see the benefits of the cloud scale within their own data center environment, right? Which some of these audience call as a hybrid cloud, etc. Basically, your ability to manage workloads, some of it within your data center and cloud. So now some of these cloud provider guys, what they're doing is they're taking all the cloud capabilities, putting it in a box and giving it to the customer so that they can use it in the data center. So for example, AWS Outpost, the first service that we're talking about right now, is basically you can rent AWS to run within your own data center. So basically think of it like AWS in a box. Where you can launch EC2 instances, you can use the same set of tools like AWS console or cloud formation template, and we also in the previous slides touch base about how you can run EMR jobs on Outpost itself. So a lot of these AWS services that's running on the public cloud, now customers can run them within their own data center. So that's what Outpost is essentially for. Customers can rent hardware appliances from AWS, and those appliances come with the cloud built in.
Gotcha. That's great.
Exactly. So the next set of services in relation to the edge computing is something called as a local zones. Local zones makes your cloud hyperlocal by bringing the entire compute, storage and network services to a user within a city, right? So think of it like you have these regional centers which are large data centers that is spread outside of the cities, but unfortunately for an object like a self-driving car, which requires much more closer compute and better network capability, it cannot do that round trip that far. So by having a local zone, so you have a geographic proximity for end users, and developers can choose to deploy applications whether they want to deploy it on an availability zone, a regional zone or a local zone. Yeah. The next last one is actually called the wavelength zones. Basically, wavelength zones are kind of an infrastructure deployment. Think of it like a network deployment which binds the compute and storage with the network, with the telecommunications providers network. So the in this aspect, Amazon has partnered with Verizon. Verizon is rolling out 5G across the US with starting in Chicago. I would say next month. So basically, Wavelength brings the power of AWS cloud to the edge and enable latency sensitive use cases. Imagine that they are coupling with a strong 5G network provider where they are able to bring storage and compute. AWS is bringing the storage and compute, the vendor is bringing the network capability. So a combination of these gives a better experience to the end users, almost like a near real-time responses. So this is again part of the local zone. This is a subset of the local zone capability, but here we are blending all of the best models by bringing a very, very powerful network in 5G, and we are bringing the storage and compute capabilities from AWS. Yeah.
So one of the things over the years, AWS, because they were the first, they get picked on a little bit for between the other providers that are newer in a lot of ways, is the latency issues with where some of the customers are located versus where their data centers are located. So it sounds like they're really trying to make that complaint go away with all these edge services. Is that a fair statement?
That's a fair statement. The other way to look at it is, of course, there will be context-sensitive applications that users need to access faster. But I don't think, if it takes a few milliseconds that users are complaining about. But what's really driving this trend is IoT. Because a lot of devices, like for example smart meters, self-driving cars, needs to be constantly connected to the network, constantly be processing data, right? And unfortunately they cannot do these round trips back. So you really need to bring the network, compute, storage, everything to much closer to those objects, these IoT enabled devices, for them to become smarter and smarter, right? I think more than the end user experience, which is also a very key case, a lot of physical objects that are becoming much internet enabled is driving this trend, because they always need to be connected, they always need to process data, they need to get smarter while processing the data without much latency. So that big trend of IoT is actually driving the edge computing.
That's a great point. And people, we don't always think about the IoT, and even though we all have IoT devices on us almost at any given time during the day of some sort, whether it be from an Apple Watch to our cell phones to whatever, and now our cars, my car is IoT enabled to give feedback, and all kinds of information is feeding to the manufacturer as well as to myself and to my app for my car. Yeah. So it's really fascinating and necessary as well. So it makes sense that they would partner with like a Verizon or another cell company that already is used to having this kind of ubiquitous coverage, everywhere and along main streams of highways as well. So they're really going after it in a large way, which I think is probably going to really help them separate from the competition too.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
Great. Well, we've gotten to the end here, and it looks like we've seen a couple questions come in, so we'll give a little bit of time here just for any other questions that might come in. And so I'll kind of turn to Kelsey here in just a second and see what we've got. Kelsey?
Yeah, I do have a couple of questions that have come in over the course of the talk. I will just go ahead and start with the first one, not in any other particular order. How many services total did AWS launch at reInvent 19?
Yeah, roughly around 42 new services that they have launched at reInvent, and not to cover the minor enhancements to the existing services, which probably takes us to more than like 100 or a 200. I think the new services itself, completely new offerings to the market, first time to the market, we're talking about 42 new services.
That's great. What is AWS Nitro? I've heard that as a buzzword.
Yeah. So that's really interesting. So what Amazon has been really doing is they have been providing the EC2 instances, which are like boxes that allows you to run applications. But there are three layers within that stack, which is the compute, the storage, and the network and the virtualization. So what really Amazon has did is, can we put the compute, the storage, the virtualization independent of the EC2 instance itself. So that's where Nitro was the new kind of technology, where they said, I'm going to offload. So today a server is bound by its capacity around what it can do around compute, network, and what its hypervisor allows you to do. By isolating them, it's actually giving a centralized capabilities with Nitro, so that any EC2 instance is not bound by its physical capabilities. of compute, storage, etc. So it's kind of a new mechanism where it says, hey, no EC2 instance should be bound by its compute, network, or hypervisor limitations. So it's kind of an abstract system. It allows the entire EC2 instances itself to scale seamlessly. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. So it just basically makes it very fluid.
Yes.
And would really just help customers' efficiency tremendously along with their peak times.
Exactly. A simple way to look at it is, it's almost like its own chip in itself, but the chip doesn't have any binding around a specific capacity, and it can be as elastic as possible.
That's great.
Okay, the last one that I have here, and I haven't seen any others pop in, the last question that I have is Amazon Code Guru available?
Yeah. So we talked about the Code Guru service in one of the earlier slides. Right now, the Code Guru is open up to certain developers supporting certain runtimes. Like for example, it's available for Java, it's available for .NET, it's available for some of the popular languages. But I think later this year, it's going to be generally available for a wide range of technologies, like starting Python, Go, etc. Right now, it supports a limited set of languages and frameworks, but later this year, they are going to open it up. It's going to be under general availability. Right now, you can say it's in a alpha stage. Yeah.
Okay. Great. All right. Well, that is all of the questions that we have for you, Satya. I just want all the attendees to know too, if you continue to have questions, feel free to email Satya or check our website, send them a chat, that kind of thing. We can answer you there as well. And then we would love to keep any conversations going on social media as well. So feel free to post to us there. We'll be happy to get back to you. So thank you everyone for joining us.
And thank you, Satya. Appreciate you. We know you're busy with clients and our customers. So I always appreciate when you're able to step away and share your knowledge with everyone out there. So thanks again.
Yeah, thanks, Nick.